Hello, Scouted Football podcast fans. Welcome back to the pod. I'd just like to begin by saying I can't believe we're into the home straight of the 2020-21 season. Lighter evenings, Champions League quarterfinals, and actually taking an interest in the promotion and relegation permutations of leagues we ordinarily wouldn't be too fussed about. It truly is a beautiful, beautiful time of the year. In Serie A this season, Juve have been toppled, I think it's safe to say, although that was expected to some extent with Andrea Pirlo taking over with no managerial experience of any kind. All things considered, though, I think he's done all right, albeit helped by a considerable amount of footballing riches at his disposal. And with 10 games remaining, Inter have a 10-point lead over their city rivals Milan and 9 wins on the spin in the league. It looks as though Antonio Conte's men are going to be claiming a first Scudetto in about a decade. Meanwhile, at the bottom, you've got Crotone, Parma, Cagliari and Torino, all in dire straits, threatened with dropping into Serie B. No prizes then for guessing which league we're discussing this week. It's Serie A, and that can only mean the one, the only Stephen Ganavas returns to the pod. It was Souvlaki Wednesdays with the boys. How was it? Talk us through it.
Yeah, so we've gone Greek Wednesdays into Serie A podcast. So I'm covering all aspects of my ancestry in one evening. You love to see it.
You do really love to see it. How was the souvlaki?
It was delightful. It was delightful. Absolutely fantastic.
Okay, well, we've got a happy Steve on the pod then. That usually makes
got a full stomach, caffeine in, so we're ready to go.
Usually makes for a good recording then. But yeah, Serie A in summary this season then. What is your experience of watching this campaign? Obviously, from a Juve perspective, you don't seem overly despondent that the run is over.
Yeah. For me, it's Serie A. I think there's a lot of doomers that are pretty disappointed with what they've seen this season, but at the end of the day, you win 9 Serie A titles in a row. Eventually, the cycle comes to an end, and someone else is going to win it. You've got Inter, Milan, Napoli, Roma, like other big teams that are trying to win it, and eventually one of them is going to get good enough. And it's not like Juventus is ceding the title to a terrible team. This Inter team has been a juggernaut this season. They got one of the best coaches in the world. So yeah, it is what it is, I guess.
It is what it is. Well, that's a very diplomatic way of putting it. But yeah, in terms of just giving everybody sort of a taster of what Serie A has been this season, we're going to sort of break it down just for a little introduction here into winners, losers, surprises, and disappointments. Steve, who would your big winners and losers be from this year's campaign?
Yes, so obviously Inter is the big winner. They're going to win the title after, I think now 11 or 12 years without it. I think the Antonio Conte project has clearly been a success. He's put a team together that just works. They've been quite lucky that they've had quite a lot of continuity in their squad as well. Not too many injuries, not too much coronavirus, which has affected quite a lot of teams in Serie A. And then other winners, I would say, obviously Atalanta you got to throw in there because they're looking likely to qualify for the Champions League once again. Although it's hard to say now whether we just expect them to be there these days or whether this is an outstanding season, but we'll chuck them in there. And then, especially when you consider some of the turmoil with the Papu Gomez situation. Yeah, so to overcome that and, still do well in the Champions League as well, we forget. And then the other team I'd probably go is after a lot of false starts in their renewal, AC Milan this season have put together, I think, a bit of I think they're faltering a little bit now with a very young squad, but I think they've finally put the pieces together on building a new cycle with some quite exciting players that I think will continue to get better into the coming seasons as they add a couple more little pieces to the squad. So yeah, they're probably the top 3. But then obviously you got Hellas Verona, Sassuolo, or some of the mid-table teams that have also done quite well. And yeah.
Well, yes, I mean, in this episode, we're going to discuss the standout stats in Serie A this season. And you mentioning Sassuolo there, Steve, there's one player in particular from Sassuolo who we are going to discuss. But in terms of surprises and disappointments, from purely an optics perspective, but not from a statistical perspective, I look at Torino this season, 17th in the table, 24 points, very much on the brink of sort of the relegation zone. Would you say that this team, who were sort of perpetually around the 7th to 10th mark for quite a few years, what's happened there? Because you've still got Andrea Bellotti, who, let's not forget, is a very, very adept striker. What's happened there on the other side of Turin?
Well, yeah, there's two teams really that have, I think, completely underperformed this year, and that's Fiorentina and Torino. Torino's one's a bit harder to explain because it hasn't been the complete overhauls that we've kind of seen at Fiorentina, who have gone into the season with Iachini, who's a pretty average manager, then went to Prandelli, who had problems with his mental health during the season, and now they're back with Iachini. But Fiorentina have got a much better squad than 14th. And Torino the same. It's quite hard to kind of pin it down. They've still got Bellotti, guys like Rincon, Mandragora on loan from Juventus. Yeah, it's really, really difficult to say.
So, in terms of losers, I touched on Juve in the in the introduction there under Andrea Pirlo, but I mean, at the moment, at the time of recording, Juve have conceded the fewest goals in Serie A, so you can't really say that it's been an absolute shambles of a season, a horrible title defense, just because the Scudetto's not going to be coming back to the Juventus Stadium. But would you say, based on the past decade, that there's perhaps for the first time in a while you're putting Juve in the losers column?
Yeah, well, I think when you don't win the title, the 10 in a row, it's a big disappointment, and you probably do have to go straight in the loser pile. But I think, yeah, it's been a strange season. I was actually looking at the expected goal difference for Juventus's last season with Allegri, the season with Sarri, and now with Pirlo. And in Allegri's last season, Juventus were actually, I think, 5th in expected goal difference per 90 at 0.58. They were 3rd highest in Sarri's season with 0.71. And they actually have the best expected goal difference in Serie A this season at 1.05. So I was very surprised by that. But yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of Pirlo doomers. I think he will remain as long as the team makes the Champions League. But yeah, it's hard to launch a big defense of him. I think he has made some errors this season. He's been quite tactically inflexible. There's only been a couple of players that he's really managed to get the best out of. I think probably McKennie, maybe Morata and Chiesa, probably the 3 that have performed best under him, and Quadrado. But he kind of struggled with others. Kulusevski's the last few months have just been terrible, constantly being played out of position, either as like a out and out kind of striker or more of a number 8 kind of player, when he really needs to be, I think, right wing is the position that you're going to get the best out of him. Yeah, and then you've just got kind of a just dysfunctional team going forward, and you've got this reliance on the energy and hustle of Chiesa. Quadrado's been sending in some magnificent crosses and getting a few assists. Ronaldo having to finish everything that he can, and kind of Morata stretching defenses with his running and getting a bag of assists as well. But you can't just rely on a few players' individual attributes to win you a bunch of games. You need a kind of cohesive system. But then also on the other hand, Pirlo's kind of been dealt a difficult hand. I think Juve have now had 9 players that have got COVID this season, which I don't know any other league that's even had 9 COVID cases amongst their playing group. But Serie A seems to be uniquely incompetent in terms of dealing with COVID. And then he's also had quite a lot of injuries. We've seen Dybala miss pretty much all of 2021 so far. Alexandro missed a chunk of the start of the season. Demiral, De Ligt, Quadrado, Artur, Morata, I think even Aaron Ramsey have missed, some pretty big chunks of the season with injury. So yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag, but I think if you go to a manager in their first year and they don't quite, hit the ground running and win the league, it's hard to blame them. You maybe need to be a bit more introspective and think, well, did we hire him for one season and then get ready to sack him straight away, or was the whole point of hiring that we needed to give him a bit of time to get things right? So I think a lot of questions being asked now with whether Allegri might come back and all that, but yeah, I think the cycle in and of itself is just about ready to come to a close.
Well, I'll tell you what, if Allegri did come back, that would put an end to the managerial merry-go-round rumour trail that you see in English football whenever there becomes a vacancy in England. The rumours that apparently Allegri's learning English, there'll be no more, which I'll be glad to see the back of, to say the least. But yeah, that's a pretty, I mean, it's a quite an astute summary, really, of a season which has been in turmoil because of, for obvious reasons. But for Juve, that it's not been a shocking title defense, but just one that has been beset by issues that could befall any club. I mean, we've seen that across Europe this season, with Paris Saint-Germain struggling and Liverpool's title defense being not exactly the strongest in recent years. So yeah, it's been in terms of this season, safeguarding against coronavirus, perhaps not the best, but in the entertainment stakes, a lot better.
And you're not losing to a scrub team. You're losing to Inter Milan with one of the best coaches and a fantastic squad, a fantastic starting 11. Yeah.
Hey, whatever helps you sleep at night, yeah.
Exactly. I'm just I'm coming up with all the excuses now.
Absolutely. But in terms of surprises, we glossed over that a little bit. Has been anybody, because there was Hellas Verona last season who I think caught everybody by surprise under Ivan Juric. Has there been anybody this season that you've been equally impressed by?
Well, I was going to say, as I said with Atalanta, it's hard to be surprised by Sassuolo and Hellas Verona doing well. We've kind of come to expect that Verona just continue to be that kind of defensive juggernaut. Maybe Benevento would probably be, if I had to pick any team under Pippo Inzaghi. An interesting system. They kind of press quite high and had a 2-2 draw against Juve the other day where they were quite good. In terms of players, I would say I picked out a couple.
They've just signed Adolfo Gaich.
Have they?
Yeah, from CSK, from CSKA Moscow.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
He's got 2 goals in 6 games, so I mean, good stuff. Can you tell who's reading off flash scores as we record?
And then in terms of players, yeah, I had I think McKennie I had down because when he arrived from Schalke, I was a little bit confused as to why, but Pirlo has managed to get quite a lot out of him as an attacking player, which is probably the most surprising thing for me. And then I had Christian Romero at Atalanta, who's had a fantastic season, and he's just proving himself as one of the best kind of physical dual one-on-one winning everything kind of centre backs there is out there. Bastoni at Inter has become one of Conte's most trusted central defenders, which is not an easy thing to do, to become a trusted Conte player. But once he trusts you, then he will fight to the death to keep you in the team and play you as many minutes as he can. And then probably the biggest surprise is Gonzalo Villar at Roma, who they picked up out of the second division in Spain, I think in January 2020. He didn't play much last season, but he's come into the team and played quite a lot of minutes this year, and it just looks really composed and and he looked right at home in the under-21 Spanish team, conducting things from midfield. So he's in that vein in terms of Spanish midfielders that can run a game and do some lovely progressive passes and interesting things from the base of midfield.
Unsurprisingly, we're going to start with expected goals because Dusan Vlahovic, his non-penalty XG at present, at the time of recording, is 10.4, which is the joint 5th highest in Serie A, behind Cristiano Ronaldo, Romelu Lukaku, Latona Martinez, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, and level with Edin Dzeko. So, Steve, just rattling off those names there, not exactly an insignificant list. These are the bastions of strikerhood. I mean, that's not even a word, but they've been excellent over the past decade or so. And Dusan Vlahovic is up there with them. He's got 13 goals in roughly 2,000 Serie A minutes. He accounts for 31% of Fiorentina's non-penalty XG this season. He's had a very, very large influence on them getting goals. And I think without him, based on what you were just saying there about sort of disappointments, they'd be in real trouble without how consistent he has been.
Yeah, I think per 90, I think he drops down a bit to maybe 12th or 13th. But in a team that hasn't been very good, he's the guy that needs to score pretty much. I think he's got 10 non-penalty goals, 13 goals in total, and just been quite consistent in a team that, as I said, has really, really needed his goals. But he's kind of still a player that can't really pinpoint exactly what it is they're using to turn into like an elite player. He's good off the shoulder, quick, quite tall, and has some pretty good penalty box instincts. But I think trying to take that step to the Lukaku level, Martinez, Zlatan, all those guys that you rattled off, I think he really needs to develop. Getting more involved in the play. At the moment, I see him more as a guy that really feeds off things off the shoulder, but doesn't really give you a lot creatively, which I think if you go and look at players like Zlatan, Dzeko, Lukaku, they're giving you a lot more in terms of assists, dropping into the channels, and just working with other players, wingers. Like Vlahovic has a lot of talent around him to feed off in Ribéry, Castrovilli. They've got a good squad, and I think that's probably the thing he needs to focus on to take that next step.
Yeah, obviously Fiorentina in the bottom half of the table, but they're also in the bottom half in terms of a number of stats. So their possession share, the shots on target per 90, in the actual table, they're 14th. Vlahovic is in that top 5 or 6, though, obviously dropping down when you put it into per 90 terms, because obviously he has been so integral. They haven't really been able to play without him. But I think the stats aside, using that as sort of a marker, but sort of around that, there's been quite a nice variety to his finishes. I know that he's not really bringing a great deal in terms of the creative side of things, but it's similar to, on the Premier League edition of this Standout Stats podcast with Mark Carey, we discussed Dominic Calvert-Lewin. And that he was constantly getting into good areas on the pitch to finish these chances. And with Vlahovic, I think there's quite a good range in terms of I think he's scored one from quite long range against Benevento. Quite a lot of them have been one touch, in transition.
He scored a delightful chip against Juventus.
That's probably that one then. I'm thinking of, not Benevento.
No. There is one against Benevento from like 35 yards that he smacked it. But there's another chip that he did from inside the box against Juventus that was quite nice as well. He's got a pretty good left foot.
Yeah.
When he gets onto one.
Yeah, and we saw earlier in the week, or it may have been last week, that Stan Collymore was on Twitter describing things as all this pointless jargon in modern day football, and they were all pretty ordinary terms. But if Stan Collymore is sort of listening to this, then we describe him as Dusan Vlahovic as a proper number 9, because he does have good range, but also sort of on what myself and Steve are looking at right now is a shot map of Dusan Vlahovic's goals this season. And Steve, they are pretty much all in a line.
Yes, it's a straight line from the goal to the penalty spot, and It's about 7 or 8 goals there. One on the left, that's the chip against Juventus, and one outside the box, which was that long-range curler against Benevento. But yeah, that's kind of where you want your striker to be. I think a few of those were finishes from rebounds, a few cutbacks, but he's always getting in really good positions off the last man's shoulder. I think he times his runs quite well. So in that sense, playing in a bad team and putting up these numbers is quite impressive.
What I'm going to describe this as, and I've patented this description of Dusan Vlahovic's goals this season. I'm going to call it a breadcrumb trail from the penalty spot to the centre of the goal, because it just looks. Steve, are you going to disagree with me here? I can hear you sighing. Is this a bad way?
No, it's where he feasts. It's where he feasts.
Oh, right. So. Okay, I see where we're going now. As soon as I mentioned Souvlakis, that now we've got food on the brain.
Breadcrumbs.
But yeah, he's as a defender, these are the areas that you want to stop strikers getting in. And I'd like to see actually Vlahovic's conversion rate from this very, very fine sliver of the pitch that he seems to score all of his goals from. Because I haven't included penalties on this graphic, but there's still 7 or 8, as Steve was saying. So it's very, very impressive. It's the space that you really want a striker to be in. And if he's converting those chances, you can't really have any complaints. It's the rest of the team that need to sort of pick up the slack in that sense.
Well, yeah, if you've got a guy scoring 30% of your goals, it's hard to say that he's the the main problem, I guess.
I don't think he's any problem. I think he's the saviour, to be honest. But yeah, Vlahovic has been excellent for Fiorentina this season. Moving on, and in the Premier League edition of this podcast, the Standout Stats one, we had a lengthy discussion about expected assists and what they are. We're not going to go into depth on that on this one, but just as a side point, one of the things that I found quite interesting was that last season, Lazio's Luis Alberto registered 15 assists in Serie A. This season, he has a grand total of 0. That is despite him having 5.8 in expected assists. So, you'd be expected to have 6 assists there based on the quality of the chances that Luis Alberto's created for his teammates. That's incredibly unlucky. But I just thought, he's not under 23, but I just thought that, I'd wheel that one out as something in my armory to say that that's been quite interesting in Serie A this season.
Yeah, I actually went and had a look at this today when you sent me the rundown, and I kind of found that his shot creation is down, and it's predominantly from set pieces and dead balls. So I thought that was an interesting one, that maybe, yeah, they're just a big chunk of his shot creation that he's lost is pretty much just set pieces, which is something that, when you're looking at a statistical standpoint, you kind of discount a little bit, because it's not you really creating something; it's you just being given the opportunity to create. And then the other thing was that Ciro Immobile's expected goals are down quite a lot this year. So I'm wondering whether, part of the impact on his expected assists being converted into actual assists is he's creating chances for players that are not Ciro Immobile and don't have that finishing quality that Immobile has. So yeah, potential things to caveat those results with. Sorry.
See, this is the forensic Serie A insight that you don't get anywhere else. This is what Steve brings to the table. This is why I can't do a Serie A episode without him going, put me on the pod. Put me on the pod. I want to discuss. But yeah. I mean, just moving on though, away from expected goals and expected assists. One of the metrics that we didn't discuss on the Premier League edition was passes into the final third. And that's predominantly by players, who are going to be playing in defence or in defensive midfield. Those players who are making those expansive, progressive passes to try and create something. The ball that is passed to the assist maker, essentially. The reason I mentioned Sassuolo earlier when Steve brought that team up was that Manuel Locatelli has the most successful passes into the final third in Serie A this season with 198, which FBref.com, they define a pass into the final third as completed passes that enter the third of the pitch closest to the opposition goal, which is very self-explanatory, very straightforward. I did a little bit of watching of Locatelli for something different a little while ago, and I mean, I'd kind of he hadn't dropped off my radar because he was, he's a prominent Serie A player, but since he'd broken through at Milan and then went to Sassuolo, I thought that was kind of a bit of a retrograde move for him. But no, Sassuolo have been really good these past few years, and I think Locatelli's been a big reason for that.
Well, yeah, as we've seen covering the under-21 Euros and things like that, a lot of the players in that team are Sassuolo academy graduates or products. So the club is proving that they can, develop players incredibly, and Locatelli is one of those guys that since he arrived from Milan, he's become not completely different, but he's just become so much more confident, so much more able to control games, set the pace, and he is, I think, one of the absolutely most slept on midfielders in Europe. Not even in Serie A. And I think there's going to be a big time war over his services in the summer. I think, Juventus are 100% interested in him. I think Manchester City are pretty keen as well from some of the rumours that I've seen. But yeah, his game has just got everything. His passing range is huge. And you're talking about the completed passes in the final third of the pitch. I think sometimes you really need to consider whether these are someone that's making a lot of passes out wide, whether they're central. Because if you've got someone that can obviously make those passes into central areas that are typically more damaging, and that's something that Locatelli is fantastic at, then it really increases their quality. And for someone that plays so deep in midfield, he creates a lot of chances. His expected assists is quite high, considering that he's playing that regista role, sitting deep in midfield. Can hit any pass possible. Pretty mobile for a big guy, and defensively, can marshal as a six really well. He is one of my absolute favourites at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, what you mentioned there in terms of where this player in particular is passing, whether it's out wide or into the central areas, we could delve into the more advanced metrics of things such as expected threat and stuff like that. And I think Manuel Locatelli would probably rank quite highly in those regards because of where he's playing essentially where he's playing these passes into. If you're getting balls into feet in the half spaces, in the area just between the lines in front of the opposition's penalty area, that's pretty much, you're within shooting territory from there. So obviously, yeah, I can see where you're saying about the expected assists value being quite high for a regista. But how much importance would you place on this as a metric, Steve, in terms of passes into the final third? Because we've got for FBref on their website. If you haven't checked that out, please do, because it's excellent resource. But if anybody hadn't seen, there's passes into the final third, passes into the penalty area, crosses into the penalty area. There's a lots of sort of different discernments in terms of how these passes have been categorized. Obviously, passes into the box, completed passes into the penalty area are going to be of greater value, but they're inherently going to be made by players who are playing further up the pitch. Your number 10s, your wingers, your more advanced central midfielders. So, I mean, how much importance do you place on passes into the final third?
Yeah, I think I probably wouldn't care about them really at all for a attacking midfielder or a winger or a striker or anything like that. It wouldn't be a metric that I probably go to. Is they're the passes they're supposed to be making. That's where they're playing. But I think for a deep lying playmaker, a creative playmaker from deep, a centre back, even potentially a right back, like someone like Trent Alexander-Arnold, wouldn't surprise me if his pass into the final third are off the charts high. So I think, someone playing in Locatelli's position, it's quite an important statistic, because it's really showing their ability to progress to play forward and be direct. I think always need to really be thinking about statistics and contextualizing them for a player's role, a player's position, all these different little things, rather than just trying to compare, two players playing in different positions or doing completely different things, and then comparing them with one metric when, there's always going to be different factors that affect someone's ability to perform well in a certain metric.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's essentially what I was trying to gauge, trying to sort of vocalize there in my little bit. But yeah, essentially, we're not saying that just because a player who is a striker doesn't make too many passes into the final third, that doesn't make them a good player. It's because they're already in the final third more often than not, so they're not going to rank highly in terms of that metric. So it would, it's only appropriate for players in certain positions to judge them based on that metric, the same as passes into the penalty area, all that sort of thing. It's important to contextualize, as Steve says. But in terms of, is there anything in terms of Locatelli? Is there anything that you dislike potentially about his game? Is he a player that we're going to be seeing at Champions League level anytime soon? Because obviously, if you've gone from Milan to Sassuolo, is there going to be some sort of redemption arc where he returns to a Champions League quality club? Or are we going to see a late charge from Sassuolo? I mean, unlikely this season, but in future campaigns.
Well, in terms of weaknesses, I think the one thing that's hard to gauge, because it's not really his role, but it might be important in a more dominant team, is his ability to kind of step out of that position in midfield and press a bit higher, and then kind of just press deeper into the final third and camp himself in there and control the game from that position. So that would probably be, it's not even, I wouldn't say a weakness, it's just something we kind of don't get to see as much from the role that he currently plays. But yeah, in terms of where he's going to end up, I think he's definitely ready for that Champions League level. He would stroll into Juventus's midfield, for example, and probably be the best of all of them. So 100%, yeah, ready for that level, in my opinion.
Would you be happy if Juve signed him in the summer then?
Oh, 100%, yes. As I said before, I think he's one of the most slept on players, slept on midfielders in the whole of Europe. So I think he could walk into Juventus' midfield. I think he'd do well at Man City. I think he'd be a player that Pep would absolutely love to have. So, yeah, he's ready.
Very interesting. Okay, well, we'll see how that pans out then over the next few months. But moving on to the next metric that we've got here, and it's goal creating actions. And I'll start off again by this one by emphasizing what goal creating actions is defined as by fbref.com. And they are the two offensive actions directly leading to a goal, such as passes, dribbles, and drawing fouls. So essentially, the two offensive actions, meaning, as it lists there, a player who registers the assist, provides that pass, that would be a goal creating action. And if that player had received the ball from another player, the pre-assist, that would also go down as a goal creating action for those two players. Or if a player will dribble and then makes a pass, very much like Adama Traore does, then that will count as two goal creating actions for that individual player if the person on the end of the pass scores a goal. But the player that we've got in this metric that we've picked out, Steve, is Mikhail Damsgaard, who is averaging 0.64 goal creating actions per 90 for Sampdoria, who are 10th in the Serie A table. But Damsgaard's goal creating actions per 90 is just outside the top 10 across Serie A. I think he's around 15th. But the reason that we've picked him out is because he's 20 years old and doesn't regularly get full 90s. He's made 14 starts this season in Serie A, but he's also come on in 13 games. So it's quite a split there under Claudio Ranieri. Steve, is there an area of Mikhail Damsgaard's game that we like? Is because obviously these are standout stats. That's the nature of this podcast. That's why we're discussing him. Is there something from a stylistic and optics viewpoint that you perhaps like about his game?
Well, yeah, I think you've got in the notes here that of his 10 goal creating actions, 3 of them are off the dribble, which I think is it wouldn't surprise me if that's quite a high percentage. And yeah, I think he's a real moments player. I haven't watched a huge amount of him, but from what I have seen, he will just do something really amazing in a quick burst, and you just think, wow, this guy, his potential is just like off the charts. If he could do that pretty regularly, then he'd be an absolutely mega player. But I think you really need to take into account that he's kind of just arrived in Serie A. He's 20 years old. He's come from Nordsjælland in Denmark. The step up in quality is massive. We've seen Hauge at Milan this year hardly play after he came from Norway. It's a from the Scandinavian leagues to Serie A, it's a big jump. So I think playing 1,400 minutes, I think that's just a bit around half of the available minutes is a really good return, to be honest. Adapting to Serie A, especially in Ranieri's system that he's playing that 4-4-2. That he kind of similar to Leicester days, where he's trying to sit back and hit on the break, and and he's relying on Damsgaard to do a lot of defensive work as well in that. So and he's been pretty reliable defensively as well, to go with his bursts of really good actions going forward. So I think you've got to take some positives out of your first season in Serie A as a 20-year-old and putting up some pretty good numbers and being a pretty good contributor on a mid-table team. So
yeah, I think that's the crux of the issue, is that he's been a pretty decent contributor to a mid-table side who haven't really it's at no point have they really been threatened by relegation. They haven't and they won't be threatening the European places. It's very much it's just a functional team, as you say. They're set up well under Ranieri, and the thing that I like about Damsgaard is that he just looks like whenever you watch him, he just looks like a very, very hardworking player. He will run and run and run, and that's across numerous positions. He's played right wing, he's played left wing, which is predominantly where he features for Samp. He's played as an attacking midfielder, as sort of more centrally as a shadow striker, across those 27 games this season. But the reason that I picked him out, or rather that his name, probably unconsciously that his name stood out, was because during the last international break, in a 90-minute performance for Denmark, he scored twice and he got 2 assists in the same game against Moldova. In that, I think it was an 8-0 win Denmark registered there. And I think, well, that's probably why he stuck out a little bit. There were other under 23 players who were in and around the top 20, 25 players for goal creating actions per 90, but Damsgaard stood out because I'd seen him recently and I thought, well, yeah, he's a player that I quite like. And just touching on that defensive output that you mentioned, Steve, that's quite an important point, I think, when it comes to Damsgaard, because, in terms of successful pressures, he is in Serie A the player with the most attempted and the most successful pressures, aged 21 or under in Serie A this season, with 452. Now, to anybody who's not sort of diligently recording Serie A pressures every single game week, 452 means absolutely nothing. So in terms of posturing that against players that we know are really hardworking, really big pressers, Patrick Bamford for Leeds United this season in the Premier League, I think people have sort of cottoned on to how demanding his role is. He's made 459 pressures this season, and Watkins has made 455. So you factor in that those 2 players for Leeds and Aston Villa have started a lot more. They've played a lot more football this season, and Damsgaard's very much up there with them. That paints a picture of a player who is just giving absolutely no peace to the players on that side of the pitch. And I just quite like that. I like the fact that he's in a new environment in Serie A. It's obviously a massive step up, and he's doing his best to show his worth. And yeah, I'm always going to be sort of drawn to players like that who I mean, as we've discussed with the goal creating actions, are producing decent levels of output, but are also putting in the hard yards to actually get there. So yeah, he's a player that I very much like.
Kind of a little bit of the Chiesa about him, that energy player that then can go forward and be pretty damaging as well.
Yeah, an energy man. I quite like that term. I have nicked it off somebody on Twitter. I can't remember who it is, and I have said that recently. But yeah, an energy man, I think is a good way of describing him. Speaking of pressures, though, following on from Mikhail Damsgaard there, I think it's pertinent that we discuss Latona Martinez before he turns 24, which I believe he does in the next week or so. So depending on when you've listened to this, he may have already turned 24, and it'll be a sad day for Scouted football, because he's been a very, very good servant to us over the years. This season he's scored 14 Serie A goals. He's got 5 assists, so a very, very strong return. Obviously, a very, very good partnership with Romelu Lukaku and Inter this season, who himself has 26 goal involvements. But the reason we're going to talk about Lautaro is because he has the most pressures in the attacking third this season of any player across Serie A. 171 in sort of 1/3 of the pitch, his area. And I think that's what underpins his game, really. He is just that terrier-like, really niggly presence that makes him and Lukaku such a good double act. I don't know if that's something that you've also come across, Steve, or is it something? Am I just imparting the most obvious observation of Lautaro Martinez and Romelu Lukaku there?
Well, I think, in terms of the pressures, I think the reason why he's so effective in that sense is Inter aren't a super high pressing team, but they press very, very smartly. And Antonio Conte is one of the kings of a system that he's developed over a long time, where when the opportunity is there, his team will press really hard, and he does it with Martinez, and he does it with Hakimi principally, that really, really harry for possession. But then as soon as the opportunity falls away, or there was never any opportunity in the first place, his team are so quick to drop back, regain their shape, and try to win the ball back more functionally in their defensive third or in midfield. And so, yeah, and then in terms of working with Lukaku, I think the best way to sum up their partnership is that they don't get in each other's way. They both have the things that they're good at, but they really never kind of in each other's space. So I think that's kind of been the key to the success. And they kind of score different goals where Lukaku loves the kind of cutbacks from Hakimi. He loves the bursting past the defense off the shoulder, whereas Martinez will kind of looking out for fortuitous moments where he can get onto something in the box and just create something out of nothing. So yeah, a great strike partnership. Conte has his team that he just loves, and it works. And they should stroll on and win the title this season.
Yeah, I definitely think it's important to stress that Inter are not necessarily a high pressing team or a really vigorous pressing team, which sort of highlights why Latona Martinez is output in that area in terms of pressures in the attacking third is so impressive, because just getting up it's quite topical that we mention this because Sampdoria are top of the attempted pressures in Serie A this season, and Inter are all the way down in 15th, I believe.
I think I was going to say, I think they'll bottom 25%. Yeah, I think they'll have a lot of forward attacking third pressures, I think, because they will look to win the ball back in the first few seconds of losing it. But then I don't think they'll have many defensive or midfield pressures because that's when they'll sit back and try and, let the game come to them and nip in at an opportune moment rather than pushing to win the ball back. Whereas I think Sampdoria are a team where they want to press, win the ball back, and break quickly, and it just suits Ranieri's style better, getting those counter-attacking opportunities. Then when he can get balls in behind and send players out wide, get crosses in. So it's two different systems. But I tell you what, for Conte, he's got the team drilled perfectly, and they just know exactly what to do.
Well, yeah, fancy that. They are 5th for pressures in the attacking third. So yeah, I think very much we've hit the nail on the head there, essentially. Well, that just about finishes things for this week's podcast. Standout Serie A Stats. If you did enjoy this episode, please do consider recommending us to a friend, family member, or anybody else who has an interest in football. I'm sure that they'll find the rapport between myself and Steve as heartwarming as it is for us. But yeah, it's been another enjoyable one to record. I will be back next week. Do also check out our Patreon. Our subscriber-only podcasts are on there, and there will be a new one up there by the time you're listening to this, and that will be a summary of the Under-21 European Championships group stage with myself and Steve. Do not miss that. But yeah, thank you very much for tuning in. In the meantime, stay safe, take care, and bye for now.